Howard McDonald. My birth date is December the 5th, 1921. And I graduated from Winter High School in 1940. And at that time, the draft had started. I signed up for the draft. And then I also learned that there was a school here in Des Moines, enlisted reserve, that I could first learn radio, and then I transferred into code. Studying radio, I also had to get into math because of the parts in a radio that had to be matched. And I had a math class the first thing in the morning of about 4 hours, and it was trigonometry that I had never got into. I knew algebra pretty well, and I could handle geometry, but it was over my head in trigonometry. And I learned that they had a code school at the same place, and I decided I was going to get into code school to get away from that math. But then, when I got started with that, I liked it. And I learned code and graduated 15 words a minute. And all it was 5-letter coded groups that they run through the coder. You have to learn the dots and dashes, of course, for the different letters, and there's a rhythm to it. And you get into that rhythm, and then it's a matter of gaining speed. But when I was across and copying code, they could bring mail in, and I'd tell them to open it and sit down beside me. And I'd read the mail while I was copying code, because if you get into it far enough, you do it automatically. And then went into active duty through Camp Dodge. Went to Kohler, California for 6 weeks of basic, and then transferred to Davis, which was the California Agriculture School, and high-speed code school there, and graduated out of there at 35 words a minute, 2 days before Christmas. From there on, I joined the 3103rd, which was a activated battalion for this secret work that we were going to be doing. And the last of January in 44, got on the Mauritania ship, and 9 days later we were in England. They were using the high-speed men in teams to monitor all of these nets, and we had to write them out on a typewriter, and then about each week these were transported to 12th Army Group headquarters, wherever it happened to be, for them to review and know what had happened with all these nets. I was one out of 3 that started and went to Louth, which is up close to the Scottish border, if you've ever been in England. And we started transmitting back and forth to the station that was down around London, which basically was the headquarters station. Of course, D-Day was on the 6th of June. And then about the 12th of June, we moved and kept sending back and forth until the 20th of June before we stopped. By that time, they had the beachhead in Normandy. Hitler was, they had put the word out that we were going to invade anywhere but in Normandy. Most of Germany was convinced that that was where we were going to cross, because that was the shortest. And by transmitting until the 20th, it was holding a big army over there waiting for us, and didn't know, of course, that there was nobody to cross. They knew Normandy had happened, but they thought the big push was still going to be across there. Patton was involved with all this mock-up stuff ahead of time, before D-Day. And then after D-Day, they transferred him, and he became in command of the 3rd Armored. And when it got around and to the time of the Battle of the Bulge, he was the armored in the south side of that bulge, but the north side got broke away, and he pulled him out and sent him up around to stop him. And when they did, then they put our outfit in the south side with those radios again, sitting there sending radios, or sending those messages that didn't mean a thing, no way to uncode it, but because of the combination of everything, they figured it was another FUSAG outfit sitting in there. This was all planned daily, actually, I was told, and set up to transmit these messages from the 2 stations, the one that I was on and the one that was the other one.
Okay.
And incidentally, the first time I started transmitting, the first day, I recognized 2 operators on the other station, and they were guys that I trained with in California. Your fist, as they call it, on hand key is just like your fingerprints. There's no 2 alike.
Really?
And I recognized them. And one of the guys was my roommate in California. Mm-hmm. And I knew instantly in just 2 or 3 seconds when he started sending and I started receiving who it was. It made me feel as if I was working with somebody I already knew. Yeah. And the second man, he was from John Marion was somewhere in Minnesota. He lived somewhere in Minnesota, in the western part of it. The other one was Don Barber, and he lived around Rockport, Illinois. And I always remembered him because he'd get to going so fast that he'd run them together, and yet I'd have to send him a wait, slow down. You'd always have to do that with him when he started sending a message.
He'd get excited.
Slow down so I can copy it. So we got paired up later and saw one another over in France. We worked together physically over in France. 6 monitoring stations, and they were equipped with typewriters and of course earphones, so that we could have 6 men in there at one time, and each one listening and copying a different net. And that's what we used all the time. Sometimes if we were going, at one time we were based in the old Maginot Line at Verdun, France, and that time we were there for about 6 weeks. We would be on duty for 4 hours, and then we would be off duty for 6 hours, and then we'd be back on duty, and we rotate the clock around 24 hours a day that way. And with just 3 men, like there was when I was on that one radio, you was getting off long enough to eat and sleep, and then you was back working again. I wrote letters back, and we had to be so careful of what we put in a letter, because every letter was censored that went out. And I should go back and tell you, when we went over on the boat, we had a shipping number of 2009A. And after we hit Liverpool, basically that's dropped. So if anybody, we were instructed, if anybody asks you what your outfit is, you tell them 2009A. And that's something they can't find because it's no longer any good after you've got across and hit land. No, it didn't exist. Even though you were in the 3103rd, it didn't exist for anybody to know about. On our letters, the only thing we could say was somewhere in England, or somewhere in France, somewhere in Belgium, somewhere in Germany. I was blessed in the fact that I was in that, done something I actually enjoyed, and really was not in much harm. The only time really that there was any harm was, and I think it was WWII, France, where we were in town, and there was a single fighter plane come down the street strafing, and that's as close as we got to any danger. We were monitoring all the time, and we moved from place to place to place to keep up with the signal of those smaller radios. Then we circled it and got up around to the north side of that, and the Bastogne was the town that was encircled. And we got up north to Malmedy. We saw the cliffs where they had lined up the Malmedy massacre, and then up on the hillside, and it was snow. It had snowed about 6 foot, or about probably knee foot, 16 inches deep or something like that. And it started warming up and the sun come out, and we started seeing spots up on this hill that started appearing. And so one day, out of curiosity, we had to see what that was. We got up there and started digging. It was American GIs that had been killed and fallen and got covered up with the snow that nobody found them. And we would get there, got one dog tag off of them and turned them in. And then the next day there was a truck sent out, and then we had to go with those the two fellows that was in the truck to help them find these bodies so they could load them up and get them out of there. That was one of the saddest things I think probably had to do. And as I don't remember how long we had been on the road, but we come across this a black detachment, a whooping and a hollering, and we stopped to find out what they were calling about. He says, "The war's over. The war's over." That's the first time we knew it, of course, because we hadn't been announced that it was over. But anyway, evidently the lieutenant knew it because he had orders to get us on the road and get back to Wiesbaden. We were ready to come home. A little Caribbean liner, and the Cristobal, I think, was the name of it. First we were supposed to switch. Somebody could sleep in the daytime and some could sleep at the night in the bunks that were 4 bunks high, you know. Well, one night that was enough for us. We took our blankets and pulled it out on the deck every night to sleep under the stars. And we had an occasion where there was a community area with a piano in it. And every night the guys would gather around that piano to sing. And one night one of them say, "Do you know such and such?" And the guy playing the piano, he says, "No, I never heard it." He said, "Sing it through." And he picked out the right hand, and he said, "Sing it through again." He picked out the other hand. He'd say, "Okay, let's go." And he took off, and he got some more music out of that piano you ever heard. And the guys were standing there with their mouth open. They couldn't sing. They couldn't move. And now that I know what I did, it was something that happened that worked, that saved an awful lot of people probably.